Welcome to LiveDaf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Kuf on Daf Tzadik Testament Beis. 2 lines from the bottom. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Pshitali, this is clear to me that Mayim, al gabi Mayim, water which is floating on top of other water, Hainu hanachasan, this is their natural resting place. They're fully at rest, even though they're floating around. Let's take a look at Rashi inside. 2 lines from the bottom, beginning with the words Hainu hanachasan. Says Rashi, if you should take some of that water, even from the top surface, Hava Akira, it is considered to be an Akira. He lifted it off its place of rest. It's Makam Hanacha. So by lifting something from its place of rest, from its resting place, it's considered to be an Akira, and if he carries it out on Shabbos and places it elsewhere in a different rishus, he's chayiv. So although the water is floating around on the water below it, it's considered to be its natural state of rest, and we regard the entire body of water as one big unit and one singular unit, and it's all resting down on the earth below. So even though the water on the top surface is floating around, it is considered to be fully at rest. Continues Rava, okay, so this is pasha to me. What about egoiz al gabi mayim, a nut floating around on water? Love hanuchasan. This is not its natural state of rest. It's not at rest. Let's take a look at Rashi. On the top line, Lav hanuchasan vim not lemisham lav akiri. If he should lift this nut off the water, it's not considered to be an akira. He didn't lift it from its resting place because it wasn't at rest. Bayrav. What about the next case? We have a shaila. Ego is bikli. There's a nut sitting in a kli, so it's safe and secure in there. It's not moving around. Ukli tzafal gabi mayim, but the kli is floating on water. Mao, what is halach in this case? What do we look at? Mi amrin basa ego is azlinan. Do we focus on the nut v'hanayich? It's fully at rest. Or perhaps basa kli azlinan. We focus on the kli, which is housing, which is containing this nut. V'hanayich, the kli itself is floating around. It's not at rest. Take it, we leave it unresolved. So do we look at the egois, which is sitting safe and secure, not moving around, and therefore it's considered to be at rest? Or do we say, well, if the container which is containing this egois, it itself is not in a state of rest, it's floating on the water, so you can't say that the item contained therein is at rest if the container itself, which is holding on, containing this item, is not at rest itself. Teku, we leave it unresolved. What about shemen al gabi yain? There's oil floating on wine, so we know oil is unique, that it doesn't integrate with the other liquid, it stays separate, it stays independent, it's floating on top of the wine. And he takes some of that oil, he does the akira on some of that oil. Do we say, well, that the oil and the wine are considered to be like one body of liquid, like the water on top of water? Or do we say, no, here it's different, because the oil is separate from the wine, it's a separate entity, it's considered to be floating on top of the wine and not in a state of rest? Says the Gemara Machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbanan. This will be dependent on Machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Nuri, who holds that the wine and the oil are considered to be one entity, and the Rabbanan, who separate between the two. This nan, as we learned in the Mishnah. Shemen shetzaf al gabi yain, the shemen, which is oil, which is tzaf, which is floating on wine. V'noga tful yoim b'shemen. A tful yoim is one who immersed in mikvah, hasn't yet experienced herav shemesh, sunset, so he's still a sheni l'tumah, and if he touches teruma, he invalidates it, he makes it puzzle. So now if he touches shemen, which is floating on this wine, lo pasal ela shemen, he only invalidates the shemen, because the shemen is considered to be a separate entity from the wine. It is as though he only touched the shemen, and not the wine below it. Now the shemen can't transfer that psul to the wine, because the shemen right now is merely puzzle, it's not tummy, it's puzzle as a result of the tful yoim touching it. It's a shlishi l'tumah, and it cannot transfer any tumah any further to the yain below it. So the psul stops right there. It stops at the shemen. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer, shnei mechiber l'zil hazeh, both the oil and the wine considered to be integrated and connected. So if the tful yain makes the shemen puzzle by touching it, he also makes the wine underneath it puzzle. So we can apply this concept to Shabbos as well. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, the oil and the wine are considered to be one and the same, one unit, and it is equated to the mayim al gabi mayim that we learned earlier, that since it's considered to be one singular unit, so even the top portion, the top surface, in this case the oil, is considered to be fully at rest, and if one lifts it from its place, he did an akira. According to the Chachamim, however, we regard the oil as a separate entity from the wine below it, and therefore it's considered like the egois, like the nut which is floating around on the water. It's not considered to be in a state of rest, and therefore lifting this oil off the wine is not considered to be an akira. Continues the Gemara, Amar Abaye, Boyer b'Shus Rabim, Amuka Asora b'Ruchav Shmoina. So there's a pit in Shus Rabim, Amuka Asora 10 tfachim deep, Ruchav Shmoina and 8 tfachim wide, so it's a full-fledged Rishus Hayachid. V'Zorak l'Soicha Machzeles Chayv. He takes a mat, throws it into this Rishus Hayachid. Of course, he's standing in Shus Rabim, so he did a malacha here, he's Chayv. So this is simply an introduction to the next halacha. What about Chilka b'Machzeles? If he takes this mat and throws it into this pit in a way where it splits the area of the pit into two, and since the pit was exactly 8 tfachim wide, this mat is going to nullify its Rishus Hayachid status, because the Rishus Hayachid is a minimum of 4 tfachim wide. This mat, which is entering the scene here and splitting up this bar into two, thereby leaving each side of the bar with less than 4 tfachim width. So there's no hanacha here. Why? Because since the hanacha in the bar, which was a Rishus Hayachid, actually nullified its Rishus Hayachid status, so simultaneously with the hanacha, there was a nullification, a negation of the Rishus Hayachid dimension and the Rishus Hayachid status, is therefore not considered to be a hanacha Rishus Hayachid. So this is Shittas Abaye. If something happens simultaneous, will not count. Says the Gemara. Now, if you recall in Daf Tzadik Tes, we had a similar presentation from Rabbi Yochanan, who asked regarding a similar case where a person throws some dirt into a bar, thereby nullifying its Rishus Hayachid status. So they're very similar questions. Rabbi Yochanan actually left it unresolved, and Abaye, it seems to be he's very clear regarding the halacha here, that since it happened together at the same time, the hanacha with the bittul of the Rishus Hayachid, he's pater. Now there's a slight difference between the presentation of Abaye and Rabbi Yochanan's presentation, because Abaye presents it as a machzeles, as a mat, which is an object. So although it's an object which he's going to eventually pull out of the bar, he's not going to leave it there, he's not abandoning it in the bar, he's not moving vatal to the bar. Nevertheless, Abaye considers the entry of the machzeles into the bar as a nullification of the bar. It alters the dimensions of the mechitza of the bar. Rabbi Yochanan, however, is discussing throwing dirt into a bar. So dirt really belongs in the bar. It becomes nullified, bottled to the bar. So there's a slight difference in their presentation. They're going to analyze the difference here. It says more Abaye de pshitale de machzeles mevatel mechitza. According to Abaye, that it is clear to him that a machzeles is mevatel mechitza. Even though it's an object, it can alter the dimension of the mechitza. It can influence the dinam of the mechitza of this bar. Kolshkein chulya, certainly a chulya, a layer of earth thrown into the bar, the mevatel mechitza, certainly it will be mevatel the mechitza of the bar, nullify its Rishus Hayachid status. So according to Abaye, both things, earth and a mat, will change the halacha of the bar. The Rabbi Yochanan, however, the meiboyle chulya, when it comes to Rabbi Yochanan, we see that he presents the question regarding a chulya, regarding a layer of earth thrown into a bar. Now, why did he present this question specifically about earth? Apparently, machzeles, when it comes to a mat, which is an object which is going to be removed from there, pshita, it is clear to him the loy mevatel mechitza. Doesn't have the ability to mevatel the mechitza, to alter the dimensions of the mechitza of the bar, to change the status of the bar, because it's an object. It's not nullified to the bar, it's not bottled to the bar. So Rabbi Yochanan, to him, it was clear that a machzeles would not accomplish this feat. It was merely by the earth that he had his question. So once again, according to Abai, earth or machzelas can nullify the bar, can change alter the dimensions of the bar, can influence the dinim of the mechitza of the bar. However, according to Rabbi Yochanan, a machzelas certainly can't do that. Why? How do we know that Rabbi Yochanan holds that way? Because otherwise, why didn't he present this question by machzelas? Apparently, he disagrees with Abai. He holds that a machzelas does not have the ability to influence the bar because it's a chayfetz, it's an object. His question was merely by a chulya, by a layer of dirt. And even there, he was unsure of whether we say that since the hanacha of the earth in the bar happened simultaneously together at the same point in time with the nullification of the bar, do we say that there was a hanacha or shayachad, or do we say no? Since the landing, the arrival of this earth negates the status of the shayachad of the bar, so we don't consider it to be hanacha or shayachad, they left unresolved. But we have a wide gap between Rech and Abai. According to Abai, in both cases, the mechitza becomes batal, and Abai holds that since it happened, the hanacha happened at the same point in time of the bittul v'shus hayachid, he is potter. According to Rabbi Yochanan, a mechitza, of a machzelas, there's nothing to talk about. It certainly does not nullify anything. It doesn't change the status of the bar. When it comes to earth, that is mabatal the mechitza of the bar. But the question there is whether, since the hanacha happened together with the bittul of the bar, do we say it is still considered to be hanacha, or do we say since the shayachid disappeared when the earth arrived, it's not considered to be hanacha or shayachid? So he was unsure and left that unresolved. Let's continue. So we have a pit in Shus Harabim which is 10 tefachim deep. It's 4 wide, so it's a Shus Hayachid. It's Malaya Mayim, full of water. And he's standing in Shus Harabim and he throws something into this bar, throws a stone, a pebble into this bar which is full of water. Says Abaye, Chayev. He's Chayev because this bar still retains its Rishus Hayachid status, even though it's full of water. Malaya Peiros, but it's full of produce. And he throws into this bar potter. Why? Because it loses its Rishus Hayachid status because it's full of Peiros. My time, what's the difference between the two? Mayim. Water doesn't have the ability to nullify the mechitzas. First, we say, I believe it's the Ritva says that since you can see through the water, it's transparent, we see those mechitzas there. Therefore, they don't lose their status. Peiros, however, they nullify the mechitzas, and we don't regard this pit full of peiros no longer as Rishus Hayachid. Taninam Yachid, we have a brayso which says the same. Hazor men ayam. If one throws from a sea, which has a din of a karmelis, it's not a gated area, nor is it a public thoroughfare. It's merely a rishus midrabanan, a karmelis. So if one throws from a yam, liis ratya, out to a highway, which is a Shus Harabim, or in the reverse, umina yisratel yam, he throws from a Shus Harabim to the yam potter. Reb Shimon Omer, im yesh v'mokim shezorak, omay kasora v'rochav rabochayv. If in this sea, if in this ocean, there's actually a distinct pit there, a recession, which is 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide, that is considered to be a Rishus Hayachid on its own, and he is chayiv. So we see that clearly, although it's full of water, Reb Shimon tells us it is still considered to be Rishus Hayachid, and if one throws an object into the sea, into the pit, which is in the on the floor of the sea, he has thrown into Rishus Hayachid, and if he throws it from Rishus Harabim into that pit, he's chayiv. So in summary, Rava told us that Mayim al Gabe Mayim is considered to be fully at rest, and Ega is floating on Mayim is not considered to be at rest. What about an Ega is in the Kli, and the Kli is floating on water? We're unsure about that. What about oil which is floating around on wine? We have a machlekes. Abai tells us that of earth, a mat and fruit as well have the ability to mevatel mechitza. Mayim loy mevatel mechitza. Continues the Gemara. Hazorik arba amas bekoisel. If one is standing in Shus Harabim and he throws an object at a distance of 4 amas against the wall, L'mala masar tefachim, if it hits the wall above 10 tefachim of the ground of Shus Harabim, kizarik ba'avr, it's nothing. It's as if he threw something out in the air, and he's not chayiv. L'mata masar tefachim, but if it hits the wall at a point below 10 tefachim, within 10 tefachim of the Shus Harabim, kizarik ba'aretz, it is considered as though he threw something along the ground. Hazarik ba'aretz. Arba amas chayiv. Indeed, if one throws an object along the floor At a distance of 4 amas, he's chayiv. Says the Gemara, noch. How can he be chayiv by throwing something against the wall? It simply bounces back. There's no hanocha here. It never landed outside 4 amas. We're speaking about a juicy glob, a juicy fig, which gets stuck, which gets tacked on the wall. So it landed at the side of the wall, and since the wall is outside of 4 amas, this man has committed ha'avara dal adam shesirab. Omar vid amarav. Amarav chia. Zorek lamala masor. What if one is standing, shesirab, he takes an object, throws it up to the wall, up 10 tfachim high, lamala masor, v'holcha v'nocha b'char kolshu. Now landed in the wall, but the wall had a little hole, a char kolshu, which is not considered to be, doesn't have the dimensions, the proper dimensions of a shesayachid. So although it's lifted 10 tfachim off the ground, so it has that condition, but it doesn't have a surface area of 4 tfachim length by 4 tfachim width. It's a small hole. Says the Gemara, this depends on a machlekes. Banu lemachlekes. We have come to a disagreement between Rameir and Rabbanan. The Rameir the Amar choykikin lahashlim. According to Rameir, who holds that we apply a formula called choykikin lahashlim, we carve out to complete. Now this is a machlekes concerning hilchas mezuzah. We know we need a proper dimension, proper doorway, proper size doorway for a chiyav mezuzah. What is considered to be a proper doorway needs to be 10 tfachim high and 4 tfachim wide. Now what if the doorway is configured in the following manner? So it's 4 tfachim wide at the bottom, and the posts rise straight up for a bit, let's say for 3 tfachim, and then they angle like a dome. So on top, towards the top, it narrows, and the actual space, the actual open space, is not 4 tfachim. But there's still potential in the doorway. For instance, if you would carve it out, you could make yourself a doorway 4 tfachim wide. So the question here is, do we say, well, the actual opening is less than 4 tfachim, so there's no opening which is 10 tfachim high, 4 tfachim wide, because immediately it begins narrowing. So do we say that there's no chiyav mezuzah here? That is the shittas Rabbanan. Rav Meir says no. Choykikin lahashlam. We view the side posts as if they're continuing straight up. We engrave, we carve out that dome, and we imagine, we make an imaginary doorway which is 10 tfachim high, 4 tfachim wide. Since the ability exists, there's some area there that can be carved out. Says the Gemara, that will apply to our case as well. According to Rav Meir, we will apply the concept of choykikin lahashlam. We carve out to complete. So although this hole where the object landed is a char kolshu, a small hole, it doesn't have a proper surface there, but this wall is a thick wall. This wall has the potential to make room for a surface of 4x4. So what's the point of the Rosh Hashanah being 4x4? It needs to be a significant makim choshev. So if this wall carries a potential to be, for the hole to extend itself, to be carved out, to be broadened into the thickness of the wall, we look at this hole as though it's a makim choshev, it's a significant area. So this is shittas Rav Meir. Let's see the Gemara inside. So he threw an object into a char kolshu, into a small hole, banu lamachloikis, Rav Meir Rabbanan. We will arrive at the machlokes between Rav Meir and Rabbanan. The Rav Meir, the Amar choykikin lahashlam, we carve out to complete. Mechayiv, in this case as well, you'll be chayiv. We view this hole as though it has the proper surface area. The Rabbanan da Amri ein choykikin lahashlam. According to Rabbanan, we don't say carve to complete. Lo mechayiv, you won't be chayiv, since the hole is smaller than the required surface area. Tani nami hochi. We have a brisa which says the same. Zorak lamala masora. If one throws an object above 10 tfachim, v'olcha v'nocha b'char kolshu, and landed in a small hole, Rameh machayiv. Rameh says he is liable. V'chachamim poitrin. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Yudah Amarav. Till if he has a hill, a mound in Rosh Hashanah, hamislaket asora mitoich arba. So this hill is 10 tfachim high, but what happened is it's an incline. It's sloping upward, and it is mislaket asora. It accumulated the 10 tfachim height, mitoich arba, within a span of 4 amas. So this is 4 amas of the Rosh Hashanah below the mound, and within a span of 4 amas, this mound has sloped upward and has arrived at a height of 10 tefachim. It makes it difficult to walk up, and therefore, since it's such a steep incline, it is regarded, on top of it, is regarded as a Rosh Hashanah. It's considered to be a mechitza. It has separated itself from the surrounding Rosh Hashanah. Again, Amar Vida Marav tail hamislaket, a tail, a mound, which accumulates asora. It accumulates a height of 10 b'toich arba, from a span of 4 amas of Rosh Hashanah. So it's a steep incline. V'zorak b'nocha al gabav. He throws an item on top of that tail chayav, because it's considered to be Rosh Hashanah. Tanina mihachi. We find the same concept in the next brisa, which says mavoi sheshavei l'soichai v'nasa madra in the Rosh Hashanah. So mavi is an alleyway which connects to Rosh Hashanah. Now this mavi is surrounded by 3 sides, so minat Torah it is a Rosh Hashanah, and one can carry in there. However, midrabanan, we're going to learn this from Seches Erev Me'et Hashem. Midrabanan, one doesn't carry in a mavi, since it's open to Rosh Hashanah and it can be confused with Rosh Hashanah. So it needs to make some sort of sign of separateness. So he has a choice, either a lechi, a side post by the entrance to Rosh Hashanah, or a koira, a crossbeam. However, says the Bryce, if there's a steep incline on the way into the mavi, that incline, that slope, is tantamount to a mechitza, and no more is needed. So we see the same concept here. When there's a steep slope, that is regarded as a mechitza. We find the same in the following price. Mavoi, this alleyway, which is it's even ground, level ground. V'nasa madra in Rosh Hashanah. But when it arrives to Rosh Hashanah, it becomes slopey. It slopes down very steeply to Rosh Hashanah. Or alternatively, Shabbos Rosh Hashanah. The mavi begins, this is Rosh Hashanah, the mavi begins level with Rosh Hashanah, but then slopes downward. V'nasa madra l'soichei, and slopes downward into the mavi. Oisei mavoi ein etzorich lo lechi v'lo koira. This mavi doesn't need any more fixing. It doesn't need a lechi, a side post, or a koira, a crossbeam, because this slope is tantamount to mechitza. Rabbi Chanani began Lil Omer, and this is what we learned before. Tell him a slacket asar m'toich arba. If you have this mound which arrives at a height of 10 tefachim mitoich arba, from a distance of 4 amas, so it's a very steep incline, very steep slope. V'zorak v'noch al gabav chayav. So if he throws from the Shusram up until his tail, he's chayav, because this tail, the top of this mound, is considered to be a Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so in summation we learned that if one throws an item against a wall, he's standing in Rosh Hashanah and he throws at a distance of 4 amas against the wall. We said we're speaking about a dvela shmeina, a juicy fig which gets stuck, gets tacked on the side of the wall. So if it was above 10 tefachim, he would be pater. But if it landed on the side of the wall, within 10 tefachim of the ground, which is considered to be the airspace of Rosh Hashanah, he's chayev. What if he threw an item into a wall above 10 tefachim and it landed into a small bechar koshu, and a small hole? According to Rameh, is chayev, because since this wall has the capacity to contain a larger hole, it's a thick wall, so we carved to complete. We view it as though it's carved out and it has the proper surface of Rishus HaYachid, which is a surface of 4 by 4 tefachim. According to Rabbi Chachamim, he's potter because the hole is very small and is not regarded as Rishus HaYachid. What if somebody standing in Rishus HaRabim and throws an item on top of this tail, which is mislakid asar, which comes to a height of 10 tefachim mitoich dalad amas, from a span of 4 amas of Rishus HaRabim? Chayav, because that tail, the top of it, is regarded as a Rishus HaYachid. Continues the Gemara. Zorek l'soich dalad amas, v'niz galgal chutz l'dalad amas. If a person throws a chayfetz within 4 amas, that was his intention, but v'niz galgal chutz l'dalad amas, it ended up landing outside 4 amas. That wasn't his intention. Potter, in this case certainly he's potter, because that wasn't his kavanah. He didn't intend to throw it at a distance of 4 amas. What about in the reverse? Chutz l'dalad amas. He intended on throwing it outside at a distance of 4 amas. V'niz galgal l'soich dalad amos chayav. Now, mid-air, the wind swirled it back in and brought it back in to within 4 amas. He's chayav. Says the Gemara, how could he be chayiv? It never landed outside 4 amas. V'alei nach. It never landed. Rabbi Yochanan, v'ushanach agabe mashu. Indeed, it did land on something. So Rashi explains one of 2 options here. Either it actually landed on something, or it was within 3 tefachim to the ground, and at that point, the wind held it up, held it in place for a small moment. So it held mid-air. That is sufficient to be regarded as a hanocha, even though it never actually landed on a solid surface. So once that happens, it's considered to be a hanocha, and he's chayiv. Although the wind brought it back in within 4 amas, he is chayiv. So Rashi explained that we have one of 2 options. Either it means that it actually landed on something outside the 4 amas and then came back in, or it was held in place mid-air, provided that it was within 3 tefachim to the ground. We find the same in the following brayso: Zorach dalad amas. If one throws an object at a distance of 4 amas, so he throws it outside 4 amas, now the wind came and pushed it back within 4 amas. Even though afterwards the wind did tshuva and took it back out again, Potter. He's Potter. Why? Because it never landed outside 4 amas as a result of his ma'aseh. His action, which initially was meant to have this thing land outside 4 amas, never materialized. The wind brought it back in. So although the wind pushed it back out again, that wasn't as a result of his effort, and he's Potter. But, says the Brayso, if initially when he threw the object past 4 amas, the wind held it in place for a small moment, even though the wind brought it back in within 4 amas, chayev, because we consider the item as though it landed outside 4 amas, and therefore he has completed his rika and his chayev. Amar Rava, toich gimel, if one throws an item to Rishus Rabbin, even though it's within 3 tefachim of the earth below, so it never actually landed yet. It's still mid-air, but it's within 3 tefachim, which is a shiur of lavud. Generally, 3 tefachim is regarded as though it's closed and connected. Still, and all, says Rava, so this is opposed to Rabbi Kiva, who holds that kluta can be shulcha, something contained in the airspace of a domain, is regarded as though it landed it. The Rabbanan, however, disagree. They hold we don't regard airspace as though it landed. Therefore, says Rabbi Chiddush, even though it's so close to the ground below, it's within 3 tefachim, that is not considered to be landed. He actually needs a hanocha. He needs a hanocha gabe mashu to be considered to have landed. So certainly the Mefarshim speak out that the Rava here is unlike the Brayso, which we had back on Daf Tzadik Zayin, which told us that anything within 3 tefachim of the ground is considered to be munach. So even though it's transiting a domain, it's still mid-flight, but since it's within 3 tefachim to the ground, it's considered as though it was munach on the ground. And Rava here is bringing an opposing view, that no, even within 3 tefachim to the ground, is not considered to be munach. You actually need a hanocha, an actual hanocha. So Taisus explains that Rava here is following the Brayso we just mentioned, which tells us that the only time there's a hanocha is if the wind actually held it up. So that's a requirement, but merely being within 3 tefachim to the ground while it's still moving, that is not sufficient. Okay, so this is the halacha of Rava, that even if it's within 3 tefachim to the ground, you need to have a hanocha. So one of 2 things: either actually it needs to land on a solid surface, or if the wind holds it up and keeps it mid-air, keeps it in place mid-air. So since it's within 3 tefachim of the ground, the fact that it's stationary mid-air, those two things combine to be considered hanocha. Says in Yosef Mareimar, the kol amal al hashmaita. So Meimer was sitting and studying over this halacha of Rava. Amal Ravina Mareimar. Ravina asked Mareimar, what is the chiddush of Rava? Why does Rava need to tell us this chiddush? Lav hainu masnisin. Isn't this our Mishnah? Let's take a look at Rashi inside. The top line of Rashi, beginning with the words Lav hainu masnisin. We have a Mishnah which says, Diktani, chutz la ba'amas, in this galgal, if one throws an item outside 4 amas, and it gets blown back in, he's chayev. And the Gemara just explained of Rabbi Yochanan, v'ushanach, provided that it landed. Haloi nach, apparently otherwise, loi, he wouldn't be chayev. Mideloi ukma Rabbi Yochanan. How do we know that Rabbi Yochanan holds that the fact that it's within 3 tefachim to the ground? How do we know that that's not sufficient? Mideloi ukma Rabbi Yochanan. The fact that Rabbi Yochanan did not establish and interpret our Mishnah to be speaking about such a case. Could go in Shabbos or Gimel that it came within 3 tefachim to the ground. Apparently, Rabbi Yochanan interprets our Mishnah that we actually need a hanocha. The fact that it's within 3 tefachim to the ground is not sufficient. It needs to land on something. It needs to actually land on something, or as we said, as long as it's held up mid-air and it's held in place with 3 tefachim on the ground, that's also sufficient. But just flying through the air, even if it's within 3 tefachim to the ground, that's not sufficient. So this is a Mishnah according to Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation. So why does Rav need to repeat the same halacha again if it was already stated by Rabbi Yochanan? Let's see again. Lav Hainu Masnisin. Isn't this our Mishnah? Rabbi Yochanan, V'ushanachal Gabi Mashu. It needs to have landed on something. Amar Lei. So Merema responded, there's no connection. Amar Lei Mizgalgal Klamar. She's speaking about an item which is swirling mid-air. It's mid-flight. Mizgalgal Eisayfel Nuach. That's not about to land on the ground below it. Therefore, over there, we need a hanocha. So that's the case of our Mishnah. But perhaps our case, given the Seifel Nuach, perhaps Rabbi's case, which is different since it's about to land, drop down on the ground below, even though that hasn't actually landed. But since it's within 3 tefachim to the ground, perhaps we should view it as though it already landed. That's what Rabbi needs to teach us specifically in this case. Even here, it is not considered to be munach unless it actually lands. Okay, so for a quick summary, if one throws an item within 4 amas and the wind pulled it outside of 4 amas, he is potter. What about if he threw it outside 4 amas and the wind brought it back in within 4 amas? He's chayiv. How's he chayiv? There was no hanocha outside 4 amas. Says Rabbi Yochanan actually landed on something. And Rashi explains it actually landed either on something or it was within 3 tefachim to the ground and the wind held it in place. That too is considered to be munach. Rava points out that even if it's within 3 tefachim to the ground and it's still moving along, according to Shittas Rabbanan, that is not regarded kemunach, even though it's within 3 tefachim of the ground, even though it's about to drop down on land on the ground below. Continues the Mishnah, Hazorik b'yam arba amis potter. If one throws an item at a distance of 4 amas in a yam, which is a karmelis, he's potter. Continues the Mishnah. We have an example of a body of water which is regarded actually as a Rishus Harabim. How's that? In Mahoya Rekak Mayim, if there was a pool of water in the Rishus Harabim, in the street, Rishus Harabim Malechas Boy, and the Rishus Harabim passes through it, Ha'azorech l'soichoi dal d'amas chayiv. If one throws an item 4 amas in this pool of water, he's chayiv because it has a din of Rishus Harabim. V'kamu Rekak Mayim. Now, how deep can this pool be and still be considered Rishus Harabim? Pachis mashar tefachim, only less than 10 tefachim. Otherwise, it has a din of a karmelis. Continues the Mishnah. Rekak Mayim, and this seems to be an exact repetition of the halacha we just mentioned. The Gemara will deal with it. Rekak Mayim Rishus Harabim malechas boy. You have a pool of water and Rishus Harabim traverses through it. Hazorech b'soichet al amas chayiv. One throws an object 4 amas into this pool, he's chayiv. They want to analyze why the repetition. So this certain Rabbanan told Rava, Bishloim, I understand hiluch trezimni. I understand why the Mishnah needs to repeat this concept of Rishus Harabim malechas boy twice to teach you hakamash malon hiluch al de'at chak shmei hiluch, that walking in an inconvenient scenario, walking through water, is considered to be hiluch. Still has a status of walking, of going through, and it's still considered to be a Rishus Harabim, even though it's inconvenient to walk through water. It's a hiluch al de'at chak. It's considered to be a hiluch, and it doesn't negate the Rishus Harabim status. So that's why the Mishnah repeats the term Rishus Harabim malechas boy twice, one at the beginning of the Mishnah, one at the end of the Mishnah, to teach us that specifically hiluch al de'at chak has a din of hiluch. But the Mishnah is teaching us that we're meant to imply from here tashmish al de'at chak lo shmei tashmish, usage out of necessity, an inconvenient usage. For instance, if there's a pit in Rishus Harabim which is 9 tefachim deep, so they can deposit their items in there, but it's inconvenient. You have to bend down, put it in there, pick it up. It's inconvenient. That's called tashmish al yedei adchak. Lo yishmei tashmish. It does not have the full status of a proper usage area, and is not considered to be, is not regarded to be part of a Rishus Harabim. So that's why the Mishnah repeats hiluch twice to teach you that specifically an inconvenient walk still has a din of a Rishus Harabim because it's part of the thoroughfare, it's part of the walkway. So although there's a pool of water there and it's inconvenient, but it doesn't negate the walkway, the Rabbim still walks through, and it doesn't lose its Rishus Harabim status. But a pit, which is a place where a person can bend down, deposit items, you're trying to create a new entire makam shimush. You're trying to say, well, this pit is useful for the Rishus Harabim, therefore it also should be considered to be part of Rishus Harabim. No, we don't create a new makam shimush for the Rabbim if it is a makam shimush al yedei adchak. So that's the chiddush of the Mishnah here. The Mishnah repeats hiluch twice for us to make that diuk, that inference, that only hiluch al yedei adchak is a hiluch, but not tashmish al yedei adchak. Tashmish al yedei adchak lo yishmei tashmish. So understand why the Mishnah needs to repeat this terminology twice. However, Ella, rikak, terizim ne'lamli. Why does the Mishnah need to repeat the same example of this pool of water? The Mishnah could have chosen a different way to express and illustrate the halacha of hiluch yedei adchak. Why repeat the same story with the pool twice? Says the Gemara, you know why? There's a chiddush here as well. Rukak terizim ne'lamli. Says the Gemara, chad b'mois hachama. One is for summertime, v'chad b'mois haksham, and one is in the middle of the winter. Utzrichi, the Mishnah needs to teach us both things. That a pool of water found in Rishus Harabim during summertime and during wintertime is considered to be part of the Rishus Harabim. Utzrichi, there's a need for both. What is the chiddush? Titana chada, if the Mishnah will only state one of them, Havamina, perhaps I would say, Hanamili b'mois hachama. Strictly during summertime, we regard the pool as part and parcel of Rishus Harabim. Why? David the Inshi, because people tend to, the maski, to go down like Kurin Afshayu. They tend to drop down into this pool to cool themselves off. So it's an integral part of the Rishus Harabim. But in winter time, this is not really applicable. So perhaps the pool of water in the Rishus Harabim during the winter cannot be regarded as Rishus Harabim. If the Mishnah would inform us about a pool during the winter, perhaps I would say, yeah, that is Rishus Harabim, the kiva de mitanfi, since the public is anyways, at any rate, they're muddied and they're dirty. They're not too concerned about walking through this pool. However, in summertime, when their clothing tend to be more clean and tidy, perhaps the pool is not a Rishus Harabim. Therefore, the Mishnah needs to repeat rukak twice to inform us that during any season, summer or winter, this pool is a Rishus Harabim. Abai will propose another reason why the Mishnah needs to inform us the halacha of rukak, pool of water, twice. It's coming to cover two situations. Istrik, perhaps I would say, Hanamil, that is only heicha, to have a dalad amas. If this pool of water does not extend at a distance of 4 amas along the length of Rishus Harabim, and therefore a person would rather walk through it than trouble himself to walk around it. But if it's dalad amas long, it takes less effort to walk around it and to walk through it. Perhaps in that case, it is not regarded as part and parcel of Rishus Harabim. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us rukak twice to cover both these scenarios, less than 4 amas, or even if it's 4 amas. Rav Ashi Yama has another approach. Rav Ashi Yama Israel, the Mishnah is to inform us twice. 2 types of pools. Perhaps I would say Hanamili. A pool is only a Rishus Harabim heicha, the Havi Dalit. Only if the pool of water is 4 tfachim wide, so extends 4 tfachim along the length of Rishus Harabim, in which case one tends to walk through it. But if it's narrow and it doesn't extend 4 tfachim along the length of Rishus Harabim, mifsi pasile. People perhaps just step right over it. They don't walk through it. It's a short pool. It's a small pool. Perhaps they don't walk through it. It doesn't have a Rishus Harabim. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us no. In any rate, whether it's 4 tfachim or less than 4 tfachim, this pool is a Rishus Harab. Rashi is compatible with his own Shita stated elsewhere. Rashi, Haiman de Zorik. If a person takes an item and throws it, V'noch aguda de gamla, so he's standing in Rishus Harab and he throws this object at a distance of 4 amas and it lands on a bridge. Aguda de gamla, aguda is this plank. It's a loose plank, some type of precarious plank on this gamla, on this bridge. Mechayev. It is regarded as though it landed in Rishus Harab, even though perhaps people avoid this plank, they step over it. It is still considered Rishus Harab Sharei Rabim Baikim Bay, because the public does go through it, they do step on it, and therefore it is Rishus Harab. Here as well, in the case of the pool, although perhaps some people would rather step over this short pool, nevertheless it's considered to be Rishus Harab because Rabim Baikim Bay, the public does walk through it. So in summary, if a person encounters a pool, a rikak mayim, in the Rishus Harab, which is less than 10 tefachim deep, it is regarded as Rishus Harab. The Mishnah repeats this example twice. What for? Says the Gemara. The reason why the Mishnah repeats the concept of Rishus Harab mahalechas boy, to teach us that only a hiluch al de'at chak, an inconvenient walk, is considered to be a Rishus Harab, but a tashiv shal de'at chak, an inconvenient usage, for instance, a pit in Rishus Harab, that is not considered to be a Rishus Harab. If this pit is 9 tefachim deep, for instance, it's inconvenient to use it. Therefore, it is not Rishus Harab. Now, why does the Mishnah need to illustrate this example of the puddle of this pool 2 times? So we have 3 approaches, either to cover summer or winter, either to cover even a pool which is 4 amas long, or to cover a pool which is less than 4 tefachim. Continues the Mishnah. Hazurik min hayam liyabasha. If one throws a chayfetz from the yam, which is a karmelis, over to the yabasha, which is a rishus hayachad, or in the reverse, umin hayabasha, which is rishus hayachad, liyam, or umin hayam l'sfina, up to the ship, which is rishus hayachad, or umin asfina liyam, from the ship to the yam, umin asfina l'chaverta, from one ship to the other, pater, because in each one of these cases there was no transfer from rishus hayachad to rishus harab. Sfina is kshui zubazu. If there are ships tied to each other, metal mezulazu, one can carry from one to the other. The Gemara will discuss the latter part of the Mishnah in greater detail. Im enakshurs, if they're not tied to each other, even though they're situated in close proximity to each other, a metal mezulazu, one cannot carry from one to the other. The Gemara will explain this in detail. Continues the Gemara. Itma, we learned. What if one is riding on a ship and he would like to draw water from the lake below? Now the ship is Rishus Hayachad, has mechitzes. What is the status of the lake below? So we just learned that a yam, an ocean, a lake, is considered to be a karmelis. It's not a gated area, nor is it a public thoroughfare. It is a Rishus D'Rabbanan. In D'Rabbanan, one cannot transfer an item from a karmelis to the sfina, which is Rishus Hayachad. So how can he go about drawing water from the yam? Says the Gemara, Itma, we learned, sfina, a ship which is traveling on a lake. Rav Huna Amar, moitzin heimena zis kolshu umemale. He simply needs to position a ziz kolshu, a small sized rod protruding from the sfina over the water. Umemale can use that as to allow him to be mamali, to draw water from the water below up into the sfina. We'll explain the reason for this. So this is Rav Huna's shit. Rav Chizda the Rabbi Rav Huna, Amri, they both say a rod is not sufficient. He needs to fashion a place, an enclosure of 4 by 4 tefachim, extending from his ship. So he has a ship, and out of the ship comes an enclosure of 4 by 4 tefachim. Rashi says we don't need full mechitzes of 10 tefachim high. It's sufficient if he has mechitzes k'tzores, small mechitzes. That is sufficient. Mechitzes k'tanes, small mechitzes. That is sufficient. The Gemara later explained that this is a kula, a leniency that Chacham applied to drawing water, as long as he creates that separation, a separate place for drawing water. Now he can go ahead and lower the pail into this enclosure and let it down to the lake, draw water, and bring it back up through this enclosure. He created his own drawing area, water drawing area. and therefore is considered to be separate from the Carmelis, and it is as though he's simply transferring from Rosh Hashanah over to the Sfina, which is Rosh Hashanah as well. So one Shita says a simple rod extending is enough. One Shita says no, we need to create that enclosure. The Gemara will explain. Rav Huna Amar, Moitzi Yemin as his kol shumamali. He simply needs to create this rod and fill. Why? Because Savar, he holds Carmelis me'ara mashchinan. This lake is a Carmelis. But where do we begin counting the 10 tfachim of the Carmelis? We know just as the Rosh Hashanah only extends up until 10 tfachim. Likewise, a Carmelis only extends upward 10 tfachim from the ground below. Says Rav Huna, where does the Carmelis begin? It begins from the riverbed, from the seabed. We count 10 tfachim. That is the airspace, so to speak, of the Carmelis, and it ends right there. Above 10 tfachim is no longer a Carmelis. Rather, it's a Makam P'tur. He's sitting in a ship, which is above 10 tfachim of the seabed, of the lake bed, and he's drawing water from above 10 tfachim. This water isn't a Makam P'tur. It's not in a Carmelis at all. So certainly there's no problem carrying from the Makam P'tur to the boat. Let's see inside. Rav Huna Amar Moitzi Yemin is his kol shumamali. He needs to position this small rod, and that is sufficient to fill water. Why? Because somebody yells, Carmelis me'ara mashchinan. We begin counting from the floor, from the riverbed below. Va'aviru makam p'turu. Now the airspace, meaning anything above, beyond 10 tfachim of the floor, of the lake floor, of the seabed, is in makam p'tur. Va'aviru makam p'turu. Ubedinu. Now, realistically speaking, al pidin, according to the letter of the law, he doesn't even need this rod. Bedinu, this is nominally boy, because he's merely transferring from Makam P'tur to his ship. Ella ki heichid lahavalei keira. Chacham wanted that he should have some sort of sign, some symbolic recognition, in order to indicate to all, to demonstrate that, although in my case, I'm allowed to do this because I'm merely transferring from a Makam P'tur, this water is above 10 tfachim. But this is meant to send a signal, send a message to all watching that you're meant to be careful when it comes to drawing water. Not in all cases is it mutter. If it's within, for instance, if the water is within 10 tefachim to the ground and it's considered to be a Carmelis, one cannot transfer from there to the ship. So that's the point of the rod, merely to make that symbolic recognition. So this is Shita Rav Huna. Rav Chizda, V'Rabba Rav Huna Amri, they hold. You need much more than that. You need to make that enclosure, and only then can he fill. Why? Carmelis misfas maya mashchinan. Where do we begin counting those 10 tfachim? We begin from the surface of the water. Why? Because the water doesn't count. The water, maya, the water, arasmichta, is considered to be a thick earth. We view the riverbed as though it is extending up to the surface of the water. So the Carmelis begins right on top of the water. The water is considered to be a thickening of the earth. It's part and parcel of the riverbed below. The Carmelis begins from the surface. So when he draws water from that surface up to the boat, he's transferring from a Carmelis to Rosh Hashanah. That's why you need to make that enclosure, those mechitzas, to allow drawing water. It says the Gemara, Eloi Ovid, Makam Arba. So if he will not make that Makam Arba, come a taltal, make Carmelis, Rosh Hashanah, he'll be transferring from a Carmelis to Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, he needs to make that mechitzah. Amalei Rav Nachman, L'Rabba Baravur. Ul Rav Huna de Amar. I have a kasha. According to Rav Huna, that says, this kol shumimali. He merely needs that rod to allow him to draw. Zimnan de leka asara. We're working on the premise that this ship is traveling in deep water above 10 tfachim, and therefore the water there is in Makam P'tur. Perhaps, zimnan de leka asara. Perhaps, on occasion, there's no 10 tfachim there. Maybe the boat is right now situated in shallow water, where the water being drawn here is within 10 tfachim to the ground below. It's a Carmelis. He's carrying from a Carmelis. How can we be so sure that he's traveling in deep water? Armalei. So, Rabbi Barbo responded to Rav Nachman. Gamrina, we have this tradition, the ein sfina malechas, a large ship, does not travel, bepachas masara, in water which is shallow, which is less than 10 tfachim deep, but therefore there's no concern. Says the Gemara, the ship has the corners, which slope upward. So the front of the ship has this corner, and this sloping section, this corner, doesn't need deep water. It's not going to run aground if it's in shallow water. So perhaps the front of this ship is right now in shallow water, and when he draws water from that area, he's drawing from a Carmelis. There are these people that are these probers who carry these sticks and these poles that accompany the ship. They walk in front of the ship to ensure that the ship will always be traveling in deep water, so there's no concern about shallow water. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, the Rav Chia bar Avin. I have a kasha on the other sheet. The Rav Chizda, the Rav Huna, the Amri, who hold one needs to create that place, that enclosure of 4 tefachim to draw water. Now that explains how he's going to get his fresh water into his boat. But he's sitting on a boat, he has wastewater as well. How is he going to transfer that back out to sea? The boat is Shusayachid. The sea below is a Carmelis. Shoifchin the day, his wastewater, Heichi Shadil, who is he going to throw them? How is he going to dispose of the Shoifchin? Perhaps he'll say, the Shadil ba'isei makam. He'll spill them right into that enclosure as well. The same place where he draws his water. Says Marmi Isilei. It's going to cause him to be repulsive. The water below will become repulsive to him. He needs it for fresh water, for drinking. So you can't say that he's going to spill out that water in that same location. Me'isile, the water will become repulsive to him. Says the Shadlu Dafna Sfina. He does simply as follows. He takes his wastewater and spills it on the top edge of the wall of the Sfina, and it has it trickle down on its own into the sea below. Says the Gemara, there's his force, his energy, that is transferring the wastewater to the sea below. How can he do that? Says the Gemara, like Gazru. Chacham not apply an Isser, not an act, their decree. When it comes to merely using force, carrying indirectly into a Carmelis. Chacham only prohibited actual carrying, but not something which is coming indirectly, merely through koicha. Therefore, he can spill the water on the tip, on the top of the doifen of the wall of the Sfina, and let it trickle down to the sea below. So, somewhere we learned that one who is on a Sfina, and he's traveling deep water, where the surface of the water is beyond the 10 tefachim of the riverbed below. According to Rav Huna, that water is considered to be in a makam p'tur. It's beyond the reach of the Carmelis, which begins down below at the riverbed. Therefore, he can draw water as long as he extends some small ziz, a small rod, to provide a heker, a symbolic sign to inform people that. Although in this case it's okay, but generally speaking, you need to be careful when you draw water from a lake or river. According to Rav Chizda and Rav Huna, he's drawing water from a Carmelis, because the Carmelis is measured from the surface of the water, not from the riverbed below. Therefore, he needs to create that enclosure, that makam arba, in order to create his own separate drawing area, separate entity, and in that case, he can draw water into his ship. What about the wastewater? Says the Gemara, he is shayf on the doifen of the Sfina, so although it trickles out to the Carmelis, it's really happening indirectly, and koichay the Carmelis loy gazru. Okay, time for a brief review of today's daf. We began with Rava, who told us that water floating on top of other water is considered to be fully at rest. A nut floating on water is not at rest. A nut in a kli which is floating on water is questionable. Oil floating on wine is a machlokes. Abai told us dirt or a mat or fruit can negate the mechitza. They alter the dimension of the bar when they are put into a bar. Water doesn't negate anything. It is not mevatel the mechitza of the bar. It remains as before, even though it's full of water. We went to the Mishnah. If one throws a chayfetz at a distance of 4 amas rabim against the wall and it gets stuck to the side of the wall, if it is below the 10 tefach mark, it is still considered to be within Rishus Rabim and is chayiv. If he throws at a wall above 10 tefach and lands in a chor koshu, in a small hole, the Gemara told us, according to Rameh, is chayiv because we view as though it's extended and carved out, and it's chayiv, according to Chamis Potter. If he throws onto a tail a mound, which is 10 tefachim high, it slows upward. It accumulates a height of 10 tefachim within a span of 4 amas. That is considered to be a steep incline. That is regarded as a mechitza, and on top of it is a shayachet. The Mishnah told us, if one throws an item within 4 amas, and the wind pushed it out, he is pater. If he intended to throw it outside of 4 amas and the wind brought it back in within 4 amas, he's chayiv. The Gemara explained that there was a hanacha, either one of two scenarios. Either it actually landed on something outside of 4 amas, or it was within 3 tefachim to the ground, and the wind held it in place for a small moment. That is considered to be a hanacha. We learned that a pool of water found in Rosh Hashanah, which is less than 10 tefachim deep, has a status of Rosh Hashanah, regardless of what season, summer or winter, regardless of how long it is, even if it's 4 amas long, or even if it's less than 4 tefachim wide. And finally, we learned about drawing water from the river, from the lake. According to Rav Huna, a small rod is sufficient. According to Rav Chizda and Rabbi Rav Huna, he needs to create that enclosure of 4 tefachim to allow him to draw the water from the lake below.